Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Ruby Rogues. This week's panel we have James Edward Gray from Northern Oklahoma. We have Peter Cooper from Great Britain. I forget where exactly. And we have special guest Wynn Netherland from Texas. Introduce them real quick. James is a longtime member of the Ruby community. He's contributed a lot of things. I think the two things that he's best known for are Ruby Quiz, Faster CSV. He's also written a few books like the one on TextMate. Peter runs Ruby Inside, Rails Inside, Coder.io, RubyFlow, and probably a few other things that I'm missing. The newsletters, Ruby Weekly. And Wynn is new to the show. He is one of the hosts of the Changelog podcast. He's also writing a book on Sass, and so we're excited to have his input on the topic at hand today. Today we're going to be talking about templating languages, things like ERB, Haml, Mustache. We're probably going to dig into Sass and SCSS. We might even get into CoffeeScript. Who knows? So I'll go ahead and stop the podcast or stop the music, and we'll jump in. How's it going, everybody?
Excellent. Totally awesome.
Going well.
All right, good to hear. Let's go around real quick and see what you guys are using as far as templating languages. I'm interested in not just HTML, but let's hear about CSS and if you're using anything like CoffeeScript for your JavaScript or anything. So we'll go ahead and start with James.
Okay, so I use ERB for my HTML for two reasons. One, that when I first got into Ruby, I got in by documenting standard libraries, and one of the very first libraries I ever documented was ERB. So I know it very, very well and use it pretty much all the time just because I'm very used to it. So I typically use ERB. I've played around with some things like Mustache and stuff, and I can see some advantages to them, but also some things I don't like about them as well. And the second reason that I mainly use the ERB all the time is I freaking hate Haml. So those are my two reasons. Then let's see. As far as like CSS and stuff, I'm not generally the guy that writes the CSS for a project, so I'm probably not the right person to ask on that. When I do, I usually just edit CSS. I've definitely looked at Sass a little bit, and I think it's great, actually, because avoiding the repetitive nature of CSS and just introducing, some nesting and variables. I think that's very worth it. I haven't really played with CoffeeScript. I get by okay with JavaScript, so I guess I haven't really felt the need for it. But I haven't played with it, so I can't say too much about it.
All right. Sounds good. So you're too smart for the front-end stuff and use ERB for your HTML.
I use ERB for my HTML, and I think I'm too dumb for the front-end stuff. But yeah.
What do you think, Wynn? Is he too smart or too dumb?
I think he's too smart. Too smart for sure. I, on the other hand, use Haml for my HTML stuff just because I like dealing with CSS selectors and found that I think Jevi Grossenbach said something that I think a lot of us have been thinking for a while of HTML and Sass allow you to kind of remove the distance between the content and the styling so that your markup in Haml closely resembles your CSS selectors in Sass. So I use the indented syntax for Sass as well, and have picked up CoffeeScript lately, using that in a lot of Titanium projects especially. Haven't done it for much web stuffs yet, just because debugging the JavaScript still has a little bit of overhead in that development process, but in the mobile area and Titanium especially, I think CoffeeScript has been a huge productivity boost. I am using Mustache as well, mostly in web stuff in Ruby projects when I need to turn templating over to end users, because it's a nice, safe way to do that. Plus, it resembles the Tumblr syntax that people are familiar with.
All right. Peter, go ahead. What are you using?
In the real world, I'm pretty freaking dumb if we're comparing to Yeah, James, because I'm kind of like often all over the front end stuff because I'm just one of these kind of like really want to nail that and get it right kind of guys, I guess. But I'm pretty much using ERB for everything as of now. This is probably something I'll get to later, but some of the research for this podcast is actually making me actually want to try some of these other things a bit more than perhaps I have in the past where I've kind of written them off. So that might be a bit contentious. But yeah, I'm also using SAS, which I've pretty much, well, actually, I say SAS, but like the SCSS version, the version that looks more like CSS rather than the Hamel style one. I've been using that a really long time. I just really love that just because I love working with CSS. So I'm one of these people that, if anyone sort of has a problem with a CSS, they often sort of ask me on IRC or whatever, like, oh, how do I solve this weird bug or whatever? Because I don't know, just something about CSS I just really like. It's like people who, tinker with old cars or whatever and kind of know all the little things, and I just kind of like really love playing with that. So, but I just love the way that SCSS just kind of allows me to kind of just do the stuff that I was doing before, but then just kind of clean up small parts of it. It's not a radical change to the formatting. It's just adding a few extra things in. So I'm using that, not using Compass or anything like that with it. I just found that I tried it and I just found it a bit too complicated. I like the full control over the CSS. Other than that, I'm not using CoffeeScript yet. I've been playing with it kind of as a separate thing, but not using it actually in any apps. And then I guess the only other thing I'm really using would be Markdown on top of all of the above. For sometimes doing for blog posts and things like that, which, I've played with Textile as well, and I wasn't too keen on it, so Markdown seems to work for me. So, pretty basic so far, although I do have opinions on the other things because I have to research them nonetheless.
All
Plus
right.
5,000 on Markdown. Yay, Markdown!
Yeah, that sounds super. What I actually use on my stack is I've been using Hamel. I actually started using Hamel like a month ago, and I just tried it out, and it was like, I'm never going back. And then I switched over to using SAS. I tried out Compass, and it was the same thing. It was just, oh, this is so nice. I can hook my what is it? Where you have the columns? The grid system. I can hook my grid system into it, and then I don't even have to think about it. And
which grid system are you using?
I've been using the 960 grid system. I'm thinking about switching over to Blueprint.
Blasphemy.
But I was introduced to the 960 grid system when I was working for a lead gen company a couple of years ago, and I've just kind of been using it because that's what I'm used to. And honestly, the only reason that I would switch is so that I don't have to go through the it's a minor headache now because I know what I'm doing, but I don't have to go through the minor headache of setting it up every time I start a new project. But I have been playing with CoffeeScript. I haven't actually used it on any of my existing projects. I'll probably use it on the next one that I start. But I played with it. I played with it in Rails 3.1, and it Rails 3.1 kind of makes it dumb simple to use. And it's totally worth it, in my opinion. With Compass, I actually use SAS. I don't use SCSS, so that might be something to discuss. But anyway, so yeah, I'm in love with my Hamel.
So since I'm horribly outnumbered here, I'm going to treat this as a episode of Ruby Survivor where my goal is to get voted off the island. And I just wanted you guys to know I just did a Google fight between ERB and Hamel. Looks like about 720,000 results for ERB, a little under 40,000 for Hamel. So I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, but there's like 1 million for Britney Spears, and there's only about 500,000 for you. So who's winning there?
Awesome.
Go on, the fight begins.
That's right.
Oh, man.
That's awesome. So Peter, you said you don't like Textile, and I totally agree, and I love Markdown. So how come you don't like Textile?
I can't remember why now. I mean, the thing is, I made this decision, I must have been almost about 2 years ago now. I kind of avoided it because, as I said, I love HTML and love CSS and everything, so I was always doing everything in HTML. And, I thought I better try one of these languages because a lot of people seem to be submitting blog posts to me in, Textile and, Markdown or whatever for Ruby Inside and stuff like that. So I thought I better play with them. I ended up kind of liking the idea, tried Textile. Yeah, just didn't get on with it, but I can't remember why now. So you might be able to elaborate on that kind of thing, because it sounds like you perhaps harbour more of a direct opinion on it.
Yeah, I've tried Textile a couple of times, and I guess I find that if I need a simple, easy to translate to HTML language, the Markdown's awesome because it's just like how I write an email or whatever, which is, actually how it was designed, of course. Whereas if I need something more complicated, then I don't want to go to Textile. I just want to go to HTML and handle it that way. Whereas with Textile, I'm always like, okay, how would I do a paragraph with a class or to give it the right ID and all that, or it's like, or I could have just been using HTML and I would have known, So
that sounds about right. It sounds like we kind of think in HTML perhaps a bit more than perhaps the other guys do.
I'm so glad you said that because that's actually the reason that I don't like HAML at all is I don't understand the problem that it's trying to solve.
Not having to search for a closing div tag ever again.
Yes.
That's a failing with your editor. It's not. No,
because it might not be that you wrote the div tag. That's what convinced me to make the jump to HAML years ago was someone leaving a div tag out of a partial that I'm consuming that I didn't write, and then my whole layout's jacked.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And the other thing is it's not just, leaving the div tag out. It won't tell you which one you didn't close. So
right.
it's really a headache. It's like when you get like 8 ends at the end of your Ruby class. I mean, that's a headache too. You should be using white space and things to separate them so that it's easier to tell which one's which. If you have like more than 3 or 4 in a row. And so for me, it's not just which div tag did I close, but it's, where the heck is it? I don't have to worry about it. It's the same with ends when you're in your views is, if blah, 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 and then you just put whatever in there and it closes it for you.
It's also, I think, telling of what technologies would you give up first, right? I would give up HAML way before you would pry SAS out of my fingers.
Agreed.
Yeah, definitely.
So I feel like you guys kind of answered some of your own questions there in that, as far as a missing div, there are tools to handle things like that, like, indentation and stuff and making sure it's there. And then also, Wynn mentioned collaboration, but how many people know HAML versus how many people know HTML?
That's true. And every project, I think, is different. And even the tool chain that I use from project to project is based on who's participating. I think I straddle designer developer more than most. So a lot of times I'm working on both sides of the fence. And if I have a project where I've got heavy designer input, then I've got no problems doing something in HTML or ERB or one of those things. But if I'm controlling it soup to nuts, HAML works for me because it's not only just the closing div tags and the CSS structure. The other thing that I like about it is it's far less escaping between Ruby and markup. I mean, just with one equal sign, I'm now in Ruby mode without having to constantly be reaching for that % key. The other thing is, just by nature, HAML encourages short, terse outputs. So it fosters this architecture of putting more into helpers or more into other partials and not having these big monstrous views in the first place.
Yeah, one other thing that I really like, and it's something that you can do in HTML, but HAML, it formats, it does all the indenting for you. I mean, it's dependent on the indenting, but when you get the overall HTML out of it, it's all properly indented too. And so when you include a partial, that just gets nested with everything else. And that's another thing that I really like, because when I'm digging into the actual HTML source, it cleans a lot of that up. And the other nice thing is that I found that the % or the dot or the hash in front that tells me that it's a tag, a class, or an ID, that's a whole lot easier for me to parse than to try and figure out what's inside the triangle braces and try and go, okay, well, what attributes does it have? And, oh, it has this ID and it has this class and blah, 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 blah. I can just glance at it and get a real good idea. I guess it's just faster for my brain to parse that way.
I also use the inline filters quite a lot of... Chris Epstein, the guy that created Compass, had a blog post maybe a couple of years ago now talking about how HAML sucks for content. And I would agree. If I'm doing a lot of text generation, I'm going to go to Markdown or something else. But the beauty of HAML is if there's another format that I want to use, I just put a colon in the format name and then indent under that, and now I'm writing Markdown.
I didn't know that. I'm going to have to check that out.
So when you mentioned that you have used Mustache in a couple of scenarios, and I think I pretty much agreed dead on with your usage of it. Is I like it when I need a safe templating system, but if I don't need that, I do prefer to stick with ERB because I prefer that like Ruby behavior of being treated like a grown up. Would you agree?
I would agree with that. Mustache is kind of like safety scissors. It's almost like Liquid that doesn't suck. If you guys remember Liquid,
Right.
they came out of Shopify, and not to throw stones at great work that Tobias and those guys did on Liquid. It's just Liquid is one of those formatting languages that my brain just did not grok.
I have to totally agree with that. Isn't it what Jekyll uses under the hood?
Right.
And I can't stand that. I just ended up debugging a static site with Jekyll the other day, and it turned out to be because when I was assigning these dates into Liquid variables and then comparing them, they were not comparing as I expected, and I ended up having to use it's got this like capture syntax where it can render something out and put the contents of that in a variable. And once I changed it to do that, even though it was basically the same thing, it started working, and it was like 1,000 times uglier. So I totally agree that Liquid does not do it for me.
When I'm using Mustache on the client, a lot of times I've switched over to using Handlebars from Yehuda. So Handlebars is basically Mustache++ or Mustache JS++. It allows deep traversal of objects. One of the things that's kind of cumbersome about Mustache, at least in the JavaScript port, is you have to build partials at every level that you want to consume in an object. But Handlebars allows you to traverse an object and pick keys off as you walk down a really deep object graph.
That's another kind of cool advantage of those types of systems is that you can use some library in Ruby or and then some library in JavaScript and basically have similar templating in both places.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. That sounds nice. It would also be nice to be treated like a grown-up. But
Right, exactly. So Peter, you said you were interested in trying out a bunch of the new stuff you looked at. What are some examples?
Well, I must admit, I did try Haml like when it first started becoming popular. I think that was a good couple of years ago now, sort of before Hampton sort of passed it on to other people to work on. And yeah, I just didn't get on with it, just because some of the problems that you've already mentioned already, and yeah, it just didn't. I just couldn't grok it. I couldn't get my head into it. It seemed like a sharp curve. So yeah, as time's gone by, there's been kind of like arguments on Twitter, and people like Obi have weighed in, and Pete Ford, and like all these kind of like Haml proponents. And I've sort of been like, okay, I see why some people like this stuff, and this is kind of like why I don't, but okay, everyone can use what they like. But then, things have happened over time, and there's been things like that, like was just mentioned, like you can embed other formatting languages into Haml. I don't think that was around from the start, so when I was trying it the first time, that's kind of cool. But then obviously there's Slim, which I believe we were going to sort of briefly cover as well, by I think Andrew Stone, I think it's by, which is basically like he's taken, literally the idea of Haml and kind of almost ripped it off. Actually, I should probably take that back. It's pretty libel. But he's basically, he's been influenced by it heavily. But he's kind of claimed to have made a version that's similar to Haml, but it's a lot faster, supposedly. I've heard arguments against that as well. But with a slightly nicer formatting to it. And and that's also encouraged me to go back and look at Haml and think, well, hang on, how is Haml different to it? And, it's not that massive a difference. It's just really like tiny little things like, certain bits of extra, syntactic sugar or whatever you want to call it, to like collapse the white space and things like that, little characters you have to add in to get those kind of features. Really small things. So I think just the fact that there's this discussion going on has kind of encouraged me to go back and look at these things and just reassess my opinions 2 years on, and with a lot more development and a lot more maturity of the technology sort of under its belt. It's time to look again, as it were.
That's a good point. I haven't used Slim at all. Have Chuck or Wayne, have you guys used it?
I have not. I
haven't either. I've heard about it. I've heard some people saying that it's superior to Haml. I doubt it. But I'm a Haml fanboy.
That's awesome.
You don't have to use the percent signs. I mean, that's one big thing that they mention. So literally, like if you just type anything, by default, it's a tag. And so then you have to kind of like nest things in a certain way to like if you don't want to have a tag. But everything is treated as a tag because, I mean, in HTML, everything is within a tag at some level or another, at some depth or another. So I think he's kind of assumed, okay, right, the default should be that anything you type in is a tag, and then things have to be formatted, especially if they're not. So, the example, I think it's if you go to slim-lang.com, it sort of has, a bit like the Haml site. It has a basic demonstration on the front page. And I've got to admit, I think they do pick their examples carefully, these kind of sites. They're like, let's pick something that looks really appealing. Like, this is going to make you fall in love with it straight away. And, the Slim site is no exception. If you go to that, slim-lang.com, the example on the front page is quite attractive, even to someone, who's perhaps into HTML like I am. I can kind of see where it's going. But it's not until you start using some of these things and you have like complex bits of like you might want to get a certain type of iterator involved or something like that, then you can't start slamming into the learning curve. So looking is nice, but it's the using that is the proof of the pudding.
One of the things I'm struggling with is just how all of these templating languages that I love, Haml and the indented Sass and then CoffeeScript, they're all white space aware, yet I'm still not in love with Python.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm not sure what the difference is, to be honest.
I'm very glad I didn't have to point that out.
I mean, I don't have a lot of experience with Python, but still, I mean, Sass and Haml at least are white space aware. CoffeeScript is, but yeah.
So I actually, I've never run into problems with Python's white spacing, just because I am one of those very meticulous persons. And like, whenever I stop to think, everyone has their nervous tics that like they do. And whenever I stop to think, mine is to obsessively clean code. So I just sit there and line things up and put them beautifully and stuff. And so I've never actually made Python mad or gotten it to where, it's indentation didn't work. But I could see how that could happen.
Yeah, it just seems like that's one of the arguments that people throw out against Haml and some of the others, is that they're like, well, it has the white space, the required white space, and and then they get all upset about that. And to me, it's really not the discussion. It's it's the other aspects of the tool that make it what you want or don't want.
The white space is the least of Python's problems.
Right. It's the passing self everywhere.
Yeah.
Functional method.
So it's harder to make a convert of a non-believer in Haml, just because it really doesn't add anything to HTML that it produces. But in the case of CoffeeScript and Sass, right, you're adding language features that just don't exist otherwise. And CoffeeScript spits out just plain JavaScript, but it's not a one-to-one correlation. If you've ever dealt with CoffeeScript's comprehensions and just the way that you can initialize object literals without having to mind braces or semicolons, it's amazing.
But isn't that kind of part of the problem of CoffeeScript? And I admit I have horribly low experience here. Isn't the problem that because it does compile down, doesn't it kind of add a pretty hefty debugging pain layer there?
It depends on how you architect it. In my Titanium projects, I've yet to find an issue where I found an error in my JavaScript and not knew instantly where that was coming from in the CoffeeScript.
That's good.
What might be coming in the future, talking to Jeremy and those guys, is kind of like what they've done in Sass to include the commented version in a development mode where every line says it comes from this line of the source, so that debugging tools can then kick in, kind of like a Fire Query or Fire Sass, for example, kicks in for Firebug so that you can see what Sass files your CSS came from. The same tools I think will evolve for CoffeeScript.
One of the other concerns I've had with CoffeeScript, and again, I'm speaking from low experience here, so this could be ignorance on my part, but is the need to always have a JavaScript runtime pretty much in the environment.
Unfortunately, that's a dependency. But I was thinking about that the other day. Just what a cool language it is, right? And it would be nice if it could compile down to other languages regardless of where you want it to run. It's kind of like the inverse of the .NET framework, where you got C# and VB.NET compiling down to one runtime, and it would be nice to have one language that could hit multiple runtimes.
Yeah, that's true. So, yeah, and I think we hit the arguments that I've heard about against CoffeeScript, and that being mainly that people are concerned about adding that layer of complexity. And yeah, in my experience, you can generally tell what part came from what part.
There's an interesting thing I saw in the RailsConf stuff that's been coming out. The new implementation in Rails uses tilt under the hood, which Rails doesn't use for its views yet, I don't think, but will soon. And that's kind of a cool gem that lets, supports a whole bunch of just different templating languages. And it looks like Rails is going to move over to that. And if it does, it's kind of a neat move to make it easier for people to use whatever they want in templating.
So I love tilt.
Tilt, T-I-L-T?
Right, correct.
Just taking notes for the show notes.
That's how Sinatra handles its views.
Right. And that's another thing that I'm kind of curious about. And I know, I've heard that Peter does a bit with Sinatra as well, and I'm sure you guys have used it. Have you seen much difference as far as, using a templating language in Sinatra versus Rails or, Padrino or some of these others? Or are they pretty much the same?
No. I know some people do templating in Sinatra. Some people try and cram it into the actual file when they're doing a small single page script. Single file script. But I never kind of bought into that. There's something about that I just don't like it. I like everything split out into separate files. So never used that. So other than that, no, I've actually found it very, very similar to Rails, other than the fact that Rails takes care of a lot of some of the defaults and things like that. But if I just want to say ERB and then colon whatever, it's going to render it, and I just work in a very similar way. I guess I kind of almost recreate a Rails-esque kind of feel. If I'm going to make something a bit bigger in Sinatra, which I've done. I just kind of steal ideas from Rails. So and that's really sad to admit that, but there you go.
When Heroku came out in the read-only file system, I think is when I made the jump to decouple my assets from the actual framework. And now Rails 3.1 might change that, but there was so much pain trying to get SAS built on Heroku because it was trying to build the CSS files out to the public folder, and that's not allowed in the Heroku file system, that you had to jump through hoops to config that out of there, that I went to a workflow where would crank up a watcher, now guard, and it just watches my assets folder, and anytime anything changes, it runs it through the appropriate preprocessor, and it's just a static asset I deploy.
Yeah. So that's kind of a great point. So what you're saying, Wayne, is you edit in the languages you want to, but in the meantime, they're being built as these final files, and that's what you end up pushing, basically.
That's right, and that way, the first person to hit the site after it goes to sleep isn't having to pay for the asset generation that hasn't changed since I've done a build.
But the only downside to something like that is collaboration, right? Because they don't have the files that you have. So.
Yeah, just part of the deploy process, it would compile those one more time.
Right, compile them one more time. Gotcha.
Yeah, and that's one thing I wasted about a half hour of my life trying to get a Rails 3.1 app to run in on Heroku, and I was using CoffeeScript, and it didn't fly. That's definitely an interesting. I think it's an interesting thing that they're going to either have to handle one way or the other on Heroku. I would assume that you can also put in some Git hooks to build those.
For sure. And another aspect of CoffeeScript that I absolutely love for Titanium is with Titanium, there's something called a context, so something analogous to a window in the browser where it's basically a JavaScript scope. And any context, you have to include all of your JavaScript source. So if you have 10 files, that's 10 JavaScript includes to include that in that context. One of the things I absolutely love about CoffeeScript is it has a join argument that you can pass to the Coffee compiler. So I've got literally dozens of Coffee source files, and essentially every view in Titanium is its own factory view. It's essentially one method in a namespace that I've defined that returns a view. But during the compile process, all of that gets compiled to exactly one JavaScript, file, and that way all of my context only include one file and I'm done.
Oh, nice. Yeah, the Rails 3.1, does the same kind of thing when it compiles. It compiles all of your CoffeeScript files into one file, and then you get application.js, and that has everything in it, including jQuery.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Very cool. So other templating language, I use Builder. Do you guys ever use that from Jim Wyrick to do XML?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah, me too. I really like that, Jim. Actually, I don't know. It fits. It's like a perfect Ruby to XML translation, in my opinion.
I don't always use XML, but when I do.
Right. Yeah, I don't use it very much either. That's true.
I used to, and I switched away from it, actually. I switched to actually using ERB for generating XML, which I know is probably a little bit sacrilege, but it just feels nicer to me. Again, it's almost like taking that HTML Haml argument just to an even further extreme. Like, I just wanted to write the XML, so yeah, that's what I do.
I tell you what, ERB is great.
I forget the format.
Tell you what ERB is great for, and that's if you're building Ruby gems that include assets that have to be dynamic based on input in the generator. ERB is a fantastic way to do that, where you can have class files that unfurl themselves based on user input.
That's cool.
Yeah, and I have to point out that our ERB champion here uses Builder on his XML.
I do. I was just thinking that when Peter said that was me on the other side. But I don't know why. Whenever I mess with Builder, it just feels right to me. I guess the way the Ruby blocks nest and stuff mirrors the structure of the HTML, and it just fits my brain well for some reason.
Just like Haml does.
Yeah.
Just like Haml. Yeah, you're right. God, you guys have converted me. I'm going to go right out and switch.
Yeah, why don't you stick to your Builder and leave my Haml alone, dude?
You'll have to. I can't read it.
But you could make HTML with Builder, couldn't you?
You could, yes.
I would assume so, yeah.
That could be interesting.
Yeah, for some reason I don't ever do that. I don't know. That is interesting.
Yeah, I'll go do that.
As well.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
There was Markaby as well, wasn't there? Which was similar-ish.
Right. Yeah. There were a few libraries kind of along that. You mentioned Markaby. Era T. Howard had one called Tags, I believe, TAGZ, and it was kind of similar along that. But I never got into any of those. I think those maybe were intended. Their intended use case was kind of if you were doing the short Sinatra, like Peter was talking about earlier, so you could just kind of throw a little bit of Ruby syntax at the bottom of the method and generate some workable HTML. But I never find myself needing.
So have you guys seen Zappa? So Zappa is essentially it's a Node framework built on top of Express and Node.js, but it also includes Coffee Cup, which is Markaby for CoffeeScript.
Markaby for CoffeeScript. That might be interesting. So in JavaScript to make it... Now see, in JavaScript, I think I would like a nicer way to generate HTML.
I just checked out actually Ruby Toolbox, and Erector is one of the top ones that we haven't mentioned at all. But I've never used that. But apparently it's inspired by Markaby, but overcomes some of its flaws.
Well, the biggest flaw for Erector was probably the name, and I'm not meaning that funny, but seriously,
I think that's a plus.
I was involved in that the project mailing list early on in that project, and there was quite the dust up around the name. Some folks took offense to that name, and I think it may have even, dampened a lot of the enthusiasm for Erector when it came out.
Well, are they 5 years old?
Wow.
We're getting old.
I've never used it.
Yeah, I haven't either. I never
used my Erector. Hey, they're going to complain about this podcast at least.
That's right. That's nice. All right, so is that our final word on templates?
I think so. We have just enough time to. We usually take about 20 minutes on the picks, and we have about 20 minutes left. So yeah, I was about to call it and wrap it up. So let's go ahead and jump into the picks this week. We're going to go ahead and let Peter go first.
Yeah, I've pretty much got one. Nice, simple, quick one. I was watching the DHH keynote the other day live. I don't know if you guys were at all, but that was quite fun. I didn't realize.
I watched your live stream of it, Peter.
All right, cool. I think there was something broken about that with the caching on WordPress, and I was like, hang on, this isn't updating. But yeah, I guess it worked out in the end because everyone seemed to like it. So so no, I was watching that live and live blogging about that, and then eventually, like literally within a couple of days of all of that, literally yesterday, I guess they released several videos onto YouTube. On the O'Reilly channel on YouTube, which you can link up. And there's a few different presentations. There's like Greg Pollock doing the Ruby Heroes, which I think Michael Hartle won one, and a few other people, for like documentation work and stuff like that. Larcy Daycock, I think, for some RVM work. So that was kind of cool. But I guess the thing that I just want to mention is our kind of our friend here on the podcast, Aaron Tenderlove Patterson. His talk is on there, and it's kind of crazy. It just kind of goes all over the place, but he digs into so many interesting things. It's well worth watching. And if you start thinking, this is kind of long, it's like a 50-minute talk, and he kind of like laughs all the time, like even at things that aren't funny, which is just kind of funny to watch in itself. But at about 42 minutes in, I only know this because I've linked so many people to it in the last day, it goes absolutely insane. Basically, like loads of people come on stage and there's like a big kind of like dance that's like led by Aaron. It's just really weird. So, but really fun to watch. And it seems to be like one of these best moments of RailsConf ever kind of moments. But you need to watch the whole presentation. Don't just jump to that part. Like just watch the whole thing. It's just really fun. So, helps you feel like you're there a bit. So that's the only thing I wanted to mention this week. It's the only thing that I've watched and gone, wow, this is kind of a little bit crazy. So definitely watch that. The O'Reilly videos on YouTube of RailsConf 2011.
All right, cool.
The Aaron video is the best one so far. I think it's really good.
Nice. And you mentioned the Ruby Heroes one, and I actually got a mention on there from Greg, and that made me feel good. So.
That's right, you did.
Yes. Anyway, James, your picks.
My picks. So I'm going with two this time because I want to recommend a non-code thing, and then I always feel guilty for recommending a non-code thing. So first non-code thing. If you guys don't know, the cool thing about having kids is then you get to play with child's toys again. Uh-huh. And so I've been playing with Legos a bunch lately. And yes, my kid's like way too young for Legos, so it's only a excuse. But if you guys haven't done that in a while, it's actually kind of cool. Some of the Lego sets that are out are really pretty nifty. Like, for example, my wife and I just got done putting together a 1,600-piece set of the space shuttle, which, since it's about to be a thing of the past, was kind of cool for us. And it's really detailed with, opening doors, got a satellite in it on an arm that comes out, and landing gear that come down, and the fuselage and the booster rockets that separate and stuff. So Legos are pretty cool still, if you haven't taken a look at them in a while, and maybe worth seeing. My wife has this carousel that actually goes round and round, and the horses go up and down. It plays music, so all built out of Legos. So that's pretty cool stuff. And then since I need to recommend something Cody to make myself feel okay, ERB, right, exactly, ERB. We've talked a lot about various screencasts and stuff, and yet I think we have never mentioned Peep Code, which is like horrible, because Peep Code is awesome. They have some really great screencasts on there. Some of my favorites lately, the Postgres SQL one on there is just awesome. That's very clever in that they totally skip all the easy stuff and go straight to the really sexy stuff, so you're super hooked like 15 minutes into it, and then you'll go figure everything out because they've just hooked you so good. So that's a really great video and would be an awesome warm-up for next week's episode. And then the other ones I've been watching on Peep Code are, they have this play-by-play series where Jeff just sits down with some expert and gives them a little task, and they sit there and code it. And actually, the coding part isn't usually what's interesting. It's the comments and stuff they make along the way that is the very interesting part. So I like watching those as far as that goes. And Peep Code is just, overflowing with useful screencasts. So I definitely got to recommend Peakville.
And there's a CoffeeScript one just come out as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and go next. I'm going to do a non-code related one, and then I'll go ahead and do a code related one. My non-code related one, I'm really into. I really like epic fantasy and fantasy stuff. And there is a podcast that I've been listening to that I've really just been enjoying, and it's called The Secrets of the Hobbit. And it is done by. It's actually done by a Catholic priest and another guy in California. And the Catholic priest is actually in the Netherlands. So anyway, they talk about kind of an interesting mix between news regarding the Hobbit movies that are coming out in the next couple of years and the book. And so they discuss, okay, we found out this about the movie, and in the book it's this way, and we have these things going on. And, it's really, really been fascinating to see how that all works. And, you hear news and you hear names of actors and stuff, and it's been kind of fun. So you find out that Orlando Bloom's actually going to be in The Hobbit, and you find out that I haven't read the books in quite a while, so they talk about some things from the books, and it's interesting to hear how Bilbo found the ring in the first place and stuff. And then my other pick is I've actually, like I said 2 weeks ago, I switched off of Cucumber and started running just regular Capybara in my integration tests. And there's a gem out there called Stake that sets all that up for you, and it provides some context for RSpec and stuff. The only problem I really have with it is that I want to try out Minitest a little bit more, and Stake, from what I can tell, is RSpec only. But it looks like it's a really convenient way to set up your acceptance tests to skip all the garbage that you get with Cucumber and actually just get right into writing your tests in Ruby.
Sure.
So anyway, those are my picks. Win, what do you have for us?
Thunder in 6.
Thunder in 6.
Nice. Oklahoma City.
That's right.
I've got a couple of code picks and then a non-code pick for you. So I mentioned Guard earlier. Guard/Guard on the GitHub. This is like Watcher except pure Ruby. Got back into this one a few weeks ago and was excited about it, and thought about writing a blog post. And then when I was Googling and realized I'd already written a blog post on this one. I don't know if that ever happens to you, Peter. But what's old is new again. So Guard is an exciting way for me to compile a lot of these pre-compiled languages. The other one is TI. It's a new gem from Robert Evans, aka over at the Code Wranglers. We're putting together some of the patterns we're using on some Titanium projects, extracting those out into TI that allows you to generate a lot of these views, complete with Jasmine specs and some of that, and gives a more Ruby workflow to dealing with Titanium. It supports CoffeeScript out of the box. Since you guys are doing non-code picks as well, I'll put in one. Have you guys seen the Cricut? It's the it looks like a printer, except it cuts paper.
I got one of those for my wife for Christmas.
Yeah, she's doing all sorts of cutting with this thing. And what's driven me crazy to date is it's kind of like the razor blade model, where the Cricut is really inexpensive, but then they charge you like $90 per cartridge that has fonts and symbols and things on it, right? I found this piece of software, and it's got the lamest name ever, but it's really, really cool. It's called Sure Cuts a Lot. But it allows you to hook up via USB to your Mac, and anything that you can save as a SVG, an Illustrator or other app, can now be cut on this this device, which is really cool. So it's a nice way to make some irregular shaped stickers and other things. It's nice to do something that is not pixel driven,
Huh.
That is cool.
That sounds really nice. I might yet be able to convince my wife that she likes Macs.
Keep working at her.
Yeah, I will.
Just don't show her Haml. That runs people off.
Uh-oh.
Like I said, stick to your CSVs and leave my Haml alone.
Hey, Chuck.
Yes.
I've got to say something really. I'm going to be that annoying guy now at this point. You know, you mentioned steak.
Yes.
About a month ago, slightly blatantly, they added into Capybara pretty much the same stuff that steak does directly into Capybara.
Oh, so
it's not been sort of like no one's made a massive fuss over it. I just kind of saw the commit. It was kind of like we've added a whole DSL for doing acceptance testing, and then just started using it. So I should have done a blog post about this, I guess. But yeah, there's some stuff in there to do that. Very similar to Steak. So I'd actually moved all my stuff across from Steak just straight into Capybara now. So that may help you if you want to try and move over to Minitest.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I need to blog about this.
Yeah, one thing that I've because most of my tests that I've been doing with just RSpec and Capybara, I just include Capybara/Rails. I just require that in my spec helper, and that's about all it takes. I think there were maybe one or two other little steps. You had to install Database Cleaner or something, but
yeah,
I don't know if Steak takes care of some of that for you, but I've done it both ways, and Steak has a convenient little installer. So anyway, yeah, that's something that's interesting to know about. All right, well, I think we're done. I'm going to go ahead and cue the music, and just thank you guys for coming out again. We have James Edward Gray from Gray Productions. What's your blog again? It's blog.grayproductions.net. I can never remember .com or .net. We have Peter Cooper from Ruby Inside, Rails Inside, Ruby Flow, Coder.io, Ruby Weekly, JavaScript Weekly, and probably a dozen other things that I have forgotten.
I rule the world.
Right.
And we have Win Netherland from the Changelog podcast and a whole bunch of other cool stuff. In fact, if you go and look at his projects page at winnetherland.com, it reads literally like Ruby Wrapper, Ruby Wrapper, Ruby Wrapper, Ruby Wrapper, something else, Ruby Wrapper, Ruby Wrapper.
Look at his GitHub page. It's scary.
Oh, yeah. I bet that's worth looking at, too. But anyway, thank you, Win, for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
You can get the show notes by going to rubyrogues.com. And there's a link on the right where in iTunes, if you click on that link, it'll pull it up in iTunes. Please leave us a review and let us know what you think. You can also email or tweet any of the panelists and give us your feedback. And we are happy to have that and to take it into account. So anyway, thanks everybody for coming on, and we will catch you next week.
The database.